up?
What's up, people, and welcome to the recap video of her story. So I've pretty much been obsessed with this game the second I played it, and doing both this recap video will give me a sense of closure in a sense, because I've watched pretty much every single clip. I've thought about this a whole lot. I mean, during the quote-unquote investigation, I wrote down a shit ton of words and keywords and sentences on paper, and pretty much just trying to figure out what had happened, and I think I sort of figured it out. But one of the things that I do want to mention, that my recap is basically how I saw things from my perspective, which means that you, if you've played the game, might have a completely understanding after watching exactly all of the clips like I have. And that's just kind of the beauty of this sort of thing, right? That we may be looking at the same thing, but it doesn't mean we understand it the same way. So yeah, I'm just going to say ahead of time that the recap is from my point of view, so I might have a couple of things wrong here or there, or you might not agree with a couple of things here and there, but I hope that at least the key components of the story, that I've understood it. And yeah, so anyway, one of the things that I would like to mention before doing the actual recap is both how brilliant this game is and how the acting of Viva Seifert, the actress that plays the twins, or the woman that you see in the video, in the interviews, is. Because in the beginning of the game, you think that the missing husband is going to be the main focus of the story and the game. That's what I thought when I first played the game. But as things unfold, you watch more and more clips, you start realizing that the missing husband is only a part of the story, it's only a piece of it. And the main goal of this game, the story, starts to shift from the missing husband to just finding out what her story is, and which is why it is such a fitting title for the game. The murder isn't as important as you might think, or as you would have thought in the beginning. Sure, it is still an important part, but that's just it. It's only a part of the story. Although the missing husband may not be the single most important thing in the game, it is definitely still a key component, because it's the reason why we're able to hear her story in the first place, right? Because without the murder, these interviews would not exist, and the police, or we, wouldn't be able to hear her story at all. So yeah, I just quickly wanted to mention those things before doing the actual recap. So during the recap, or the summary, I might have missed some details here and there, but I tried to make it as clear as possible while not being too long. So before doing the actual recap, for the recap I wrote just some key points down on the notepad, and before doing that I did some research online and just basically finding out what other people thought about the game, to kind of share perspectives, I guess. So what I found out the most is that there are pretty much two theories floating out there. It's either one person with a mental illness, most likely something like split personality, pretending to be twins by throwing the police off course. That's what I initially thought at the beginning of the game as well, but the other theory, which is that there are two people, twins, one of which who basically does not exist in the eyes of the law because she was pronounced dead at birth, and yeah, they basically swap places in and out, and that's what is heavily suggested in a lot of the interviews as well. But people could understand it that it's one person pretending to be that second twin as well in those interviews, and yeah, trying to get away with the murder by doing that, basically. I myself am more leaning towards the two people theory, because for me it just seems so difficult for one person to plan all of this perfectly, and adding the quote-unquote mistakes as well for the police to figure out. I mean, it makes much more sense for two people to be doing that, right? So maybe it's just me underestimating the capabilities of a mental illness, because I have no first-hand experience with it whatsoever. I haven't studied any of those mental illnesses, so I do not know the full extent of how powerful they are or can be. So perhaps it could be me underestimating it, I don't know, but that's just what I went with the summary, that I pretty much support the two-person theory here. So yeah, that's going to be the version of the theory that I'm going with from all the clips that I've watched while playing the game. So the recap of the story that I'm going to be giving is going to be in chronological order, and it starts with the twins being born, one of which had the cord wrapped around its neck and was pronounced dead by the midwife Florence, who lived across the street. She, however, lied about it and took the baby for herself instead. So she lied to the parents of one of the twins that one of the twins was basically dead, but she instead took it for herself. She raised it herself, and that baby was named Eve, and the other twin, who basically survived and lives with her actual parents, is called Hannah. So there are two twins, one who the parents are unaware of that she is alive, which is Eve, and the other who just basically lives her life and is alive. That's Hannah, right? So Florence sort of secretly raises Eve. I say secretly because Eve basically never leaves the house. She's very protective of Eve. So Eve, besides the fact that she's also not really seen that she exists, she also just never really experiences a full life, because everything that she does, and most of the things that she does in her childhood, Florence protects her from going outside. She homeschools her, and she's basically only inside watching TV, learning things from stories, books, that sort of things, and that's where she grows an obsession with fairy tales as well. But then, very early on, while looking out of her window, Eve notices Hannah, who looks just like her, and she thought that it was her reflection, because she noticed that someone was out there who looked exactly like her. So she thought it was a reflection, and after a while, on their 5th birthday, they both noticed each other. So at that point, Hannah was aware of Eve as well. So both of the twins know of each other's existence, and then they realize they're not a reflection of each other, and that they're both two different people. Eve feels different because Hannah could just do whatever she wants, whereas Eve herself couldn't, and was always just looking out on the outside from a distance, always from out of her window, looking whatever Hannah was doing. So she tried to be like her in appearance, both because of her thinking of Hannah as her reflection, and her thinking that Hannah is everything that Eve probably herself could not be. Eve dies or Florence rather, dies when Eve is 8 due to a quote-unquote accident. It's slightly hinted in the interviews that Eve perhaps killed her, because the moment she dies, Eve goes across the street to Hannah's house. It could be possible that she just wanted to be with Hannah instead, because in one of the interviews she says as well, in one of the clips, that she thought that if she were to touch Hannah, that they would become one, like in a fairy tale, because of her obsession with it. But that turned out not to be the case, so she kind of killed Florence for nothing. But she saw Florence as sort of an obstacle, because she was the only one that stopped that from happening. So in the eyes of Eve, Florence needed to go, I guess. That's my take on it, at least, for her motive on why she wanted to perhaps kill Florence. Hannah hid Eve in the attic and ended up doing this sort of cliche movie / TV twin stuff, swapping places, that kind of stuff, you know, but they took it to a whole nother extreme level. So when swapping places and going out afterwards, they would write down their experiences in a diary, so both would know exactly what happened, so that they are on the same exact page. When, for example, swapping out the next time with the same person, so they would just both know exactly what happened, right? Hannah said last time that she was a bitch, so she doesn't like that person, so Eve would know that as well and act like a bitch towards the other girl. I don't freaking know, but something along those lines, right? And they would have certain rules in place. This went on rather smoothly until their teenage years, I'm assuming, when Hannah starts liking boys. Hannah's sort of a shy girl, so when they would swap places, Eve would usually be the one taking initiative on the boy that Hannah would like. And during the boyfriend period, they start to like a couple of guys, but Hannah grows a liking to one guy in particular, which is Simon, because she thinks that he thinks differently than compared to the other boys of their age. Also, another important thing to note is that I feel that Eve has no real choices in their shared life, as it's basically them sharing Hannah's life. So Hannah has the most control over things, and Eve sort of just goes along with it because she feels lucky to even be part of it, as she might feel that she has no real identity herself, but I'm not so sure why. But that's just the kind of feeling that I'm getting, that Hannah has the most control over what happens in her life, and if it's certain things that Hannah wants to go in a certain way, then Hannah will get her way, and Eve doesn't really have much of a say, I feel. Anyway, so Hannah falls in love with Simon and starts to shut Eve more and more out of Hannah's life, at least the Simon part of it, because she's sort of a jealous type and she just didn't want to share Simon at all with Eve. So it was mentioned in one of the clips that every physical thing that happened to one of the twin also had to happen to the other, because everything had to be synchronized, right? So for example, the same wounds, bruises, black eye, or whatever. So that's when things start to get really complicated for them, because during the boyfriend period, because when Hannah decides to sleep with Simon, this was even mentioned in a clip that Hannah broke the rules by doing so, because apparently she wasn't supposed to sleep with him, or at least not yet. I don't know what particular rules they had in place, but Hannah broke the rules by doing so, and just from that one time, Hannah gets pregnant at the age of 17. This might be another reason why Hannah tries to sort of push Eve out, or at least push her out of her love life with Simon, as it's pretty much impossible to try and replicate the pregnancy on the other twin, right? This makes Eve probably feel a bit hurt, and because she views Hannah as a reflection, she tries to get pregnant as well. Mentioned in a couple of clips that she tries to get pregnant by sleeping with a lot of random strangers. Yep. And however, she fails to get pregnant, leading her to believe that she's infertile, which is important later on in the story. Because of the pregnancy, their parents, not sure which one though, it could be either Simon's or Hannah's, maybe even both, who knows, they sort of forced them to get married. The words shotgun wedding were used in a certain clip as well. So Hannah decides to move out after that, after they get married, out of her own parents' house, and move into Simon's house, Simon's parents' house instead. This separates the twins, but Eve continues to live in the attic without Hannah's parents knowing. In a clip, Eve even mentions that she does sneak out occasionally to meet up Hannah in the park, so despite being separate, they still stay in touch, but they're less close than before, obviously. This is also the first time that a wig gets mentioned as part of Eve's get up to not get noticed as Hannah, because if Eve were to go out, people who know Hannah might think that she is Hannah because they look completely alike. So to avoid that, Eve just sort of wears this get up. She wears a wig and whatnot, which is also important later on. Then a tragic year happens in the life of Hannah. She miscarried the baby at 8 months, so no longer pregnant, no baby, and her parents died in their beds due to apparently food poisoning. They ate death caps, was mentioned, but this is a rather strange thing, because it was said in at least 1 or 2 clips that the dad was sort of a mushroom expert, and that he would take out the Hannah or Eve, at least his daughter, out picking mushrooms, and would sort of explain, yeah, this one is poisonous because you can tell by the color and the shape of it. I don't know, something along those lines. So, but he knew his mushroom, so it's weird that he would pick and eat mushrooms that are poisonous, and that he would kill yourself, right? So that's a strange thing, and they aren't actually found until days/weeks after their death. Eve notices it, but she because she obviously still lives in the attic, but she doesn't do much about it, which sort of kind of implies that Eve might have killed them as well, because again, you know, in Eve's mind that Hannah is sort of her main goal, right? She sees Hannah as a reflection, so she thinks, I'm separated with Eve. The fact that I'm living in the attic here with Hannah's parents just alive in the house sort of becomes a problem for her, so it's easier for them to get rid of. So that's sort of hinted as well, but that Eve might have killed the parents, but the police reports say that it's food poisoning, and it's pretty much left at that, so no suspicion that anyone had killed them. So after the death of her parents, Simon and Hannah decide to move back into the house where Hannah's parents lived, So the house where Eve is living in the attic. So at this point, both Hannah and Eve are living under the same roof again, but now together with Simon. Simon is not aware of Eve whatsoever, but Hannah, at this point, Hannah still did not want to share Simon with Eve. So after about 6 months, because during that time, it felt really weird because they're both living under the same roof again, but they weren't really swapping places, or at least not with Simon around. So it feels weird that they're not doing that anymore, at least to Eve. So after 6 months, she decides to move out and somewhat start a life of her own, which is kind of strange as well because she had never really been a person of her own. She mentioned that she got a tattoo to mark the occasion, to express her individuality, as she mentioned in a clip, and was singing in bars to make a living, but she hadn't laid down any roots because she still felt that she didn't really exist, but she had to make a living to obviously keep herself alive, to have a house, and just the bare minimum to keep going, pretty much. Then in several clips, the police start to ask about Hannah's marriage. It's mentioned that they are married for 10 years, I believe. Yeah, it was 10 years. There are several mentionings as well of the relationship being somewhat rocky, arguing, that sort of stuff, but Hannah brushes that off rather quickly by just saying that it's rather normal for a long relationship slash marriage. For, you know, if you're married 10 years, arguments tend to be sort of at least kind of a normal thing, I'm guessing. I don't know, I haven't been in a 10-year long relationship, so I wouldn't know exactly, but from hearing things, seeing stuff in movies and whatnot, it seems to be at least sort of the normal thing. So at a certain point in time, rather close to when the interviews were filmed, because it feels really fresh, so I'm guessing that it takes place in probably the later years of the marriage. During that time there are signs of either possible temporary breakup or a very rough patch in the marriage between Hannah and Simon. Although I don't recall it being specifically mentioned, you can definitely sort of feel that it happened just from the subtext in certain clips, and that supposedly temporary breakup or difficult period is where everything starts to fall apart. I'm going with the assumption that the early years of the marriage were rather stable because there were no real clips, according to my memory, that suggest otherwise. So during that rough patch, Simon actually meets another girl in a bar. That girl turns out to be Eve, doing one of her shows while wearing a blonde wig. So remember when Eve moved out, she moves around with a wig and was doing shows in a bar, and Simon actually notices her and kind of grows a liking to her. The fact that the wig is blonde is actually seems rather important to me, at least, because it's mentioned that Simon has a thing for blonde, which is rather weird though, because he fell in love with someone who doesn't have blonde hair. But yeah, I guess you can still sort of have a thing for something that is totally not like your wife, right? I guess, I don't know. So with Eve knowing that fact about Simon, that he likes blondes, it makes her choice of wig hair color rather suspicious, right? Perhaps she was secretly hoping slash planning for all of this to happen, but yeah, that's just kind of a hunch on my part, but it definitely sounds like it's a possible thing. Anyway, Simon grows a liking to the quote-unquote real Eve. It's kind of hard to know exactly what to call her because it is weird. It is her own life, but it's strange to call it real because she has to wear a wig to be considered someone else and not Hannah. But just for the sake of differentiating between it all, I'm just gonna call it real Eve. So where were we? Oh yeah, Simon started to grow a liking to the real Eve, partly due to the similarities that she shares with his wife. He would come to see her every week during her singing performances at the bar, and after one of their conversations they actually kiss as well. Simon mentions to the real Eve that he is not married. In the clips, I've digged through the clips, searched for the word divorce, and there was no mentioning of Hannah and Simon getting divorced, so it's pretty safe to assume that he just simply flat out lies about the fact that he is married. He hides it from the real Eve. Eve knows it, of course, but she just keeps quiet. After the kiss, Eve wanted to tell Hannah, but decided against it because she felt that this was how things were supposed to be all along. she mentions the word sharing like we had before. So Eve really has this need of wanting to be part of Hannah's life, wanting to be part of Hannah, which they did by sharing before. But because Hannah sort of cut her out the moment Simon came into the picture, she felt that the moment she sort of becomes part of Simon as well, or part of their life, she felt that this was how it was meant to be all along. So because of that, she doesn't say anything. So at this point, Simon is having an affair with the real Eve without Hannah knowing, which must be super weird for Eve though, considering that she views Hannah as a reflection, I guess. But maybe she doesn't look at a view of it as an affair, just she views at it as sharing Simon together with Hannah. So I guess that's how she justifies it not being weird for her, I guess. So the affair grows into something bigger, and Simon eventually ends up impregnating Eve, which is weird and unexpected as well, because I mentioned earlier that Eve thought she was infertile from before when she was trying to get pregnant in 17, but failing to do so. And also because Hannah was declared infertile by the doctors after her miscarriage. So both the twins thought they were infertile. Eve was particularly surprised about getting pregnant because in one of the clips she mentioned is magic sperm, indicating that, yeah, it was definitely a surprise to her. Eve, however, kept this pregnancy a secret until her birthday, so she did not even tell Simon about it. But on their birthday, it's a shared birthday, of course, because they're twins, she told Hannah that she was pregnant, but lied about who the father was for, well, obvious reasons, right? She just said it was one of the bar buddies or whatever, didn't say it was Simon. But Hannah wanted to help out Eve even more because she was family, so she just suggested to Eve that she would come, Hannah herself would come clean to Simon about everything, about having a twin sister, but Eve told her not to for obvious reasons again, right? So after that party, Hannah actually jumped the gun and decides to tell Simon about Eve anyway, and that's when shit starts hitting the fan, as both Simon and Hannah, when Hannah tells her, they both put the pieces together, because she mentions like, yeah, this twin sister that you don't know exists is pregnant and she wants to move in, or I think she should move in. And then both of them start to think like, wait a second, and they both figure it out. Hannah kicks out Simon and calls up Eve, asking her to come over. They start fighting. Eve hit Hannah, leaving her with a bruise. That bruise is sort of a key thing because it's visible in some of the interviews. Eve runs off, drives away to Glasgow. During her trip, Eve decides that Hannah is more important to her than Simon. So she did a bit of soul searching after being angry, driving off, and decides that, yeah, even though I am pregnant with Simon's baby, Hannah is basically my reason for life, right? That's just how she feels. It's her reflection. It's her twin sister as well, even though they do not mention each other as sisters, or at least not until the very end. So she decides that Hannah is just more important to her. So then when she returns, I'm not exactly sure where this takes place, yeah, because it's not described very accurately, but I'm guessing that it's most likely at Hannah's house. So when Eve returns at that house, she finds Simon's dead body on the floor with Hannah sitting near it. Hannah was pretending to be Eve with her wig on and talked with Simon pretending to be Eve, who eventually told her that he wanted to be with her. So Simon told Eve that he wanted to be with her instead of with Hannah. Another sort of weird thing, and it's strange that this is where it started to get a bit confusing to me, but I guess it sort of makes sense. It was strange for me to think that Eve would be at Hannah's house, but I'm guessing enough time has passed to the point that Simon might have thought that Eve moved in with Hannah at this point, so he came looking for Eve at Hannah's house, I'm guessing that's what happened. But weird enough, Hannah actually, when she was pretending to be Eve, she liked it until the very moment where Simon wanted to give her a present, because they're twins, it's both their birthdays, so he wanted to give Eve, the real Eve, the wig Eve, a present, and that present turns out to be the same unique mirror that he had given Hannah on an earlier birthday. And because basically for that reason, the real Hannah, or just Hannah becomes crazy because oh my god, this motherfucker, he recycles a supposedly unique gift that was only meant for me to my twin sister. That makes her go crazy and reveals that she's actually Hannah herself, and they end up fighting. She breaks the mirror, and during all the heat of the battle or the arguing, I guess, she grabs a piece of the mirror. She said it was just to scare him off. She slashes it around, but she accidentally slits Simon's throat with a piece of the mirror, and he ends up dying that way. There was a lot of blood. She is covered in the blood as well. When Eve saw and heard what had happened, both pretty much almost silently agreed that both are more important to her, and the priority would be the baby as well, which actually turns out to be Sarah, the character that you are playing. So even though it's sort of spoiler, it is mentioned at the end that Eve is basically your mother. So the character that you are playing, that you see the reflection of, which scared the shit out of me at the very beginning, turns out to be actually just you, Sarah, the daughter. You want to find out what happened to your mother, basically, which is why you're searching through those clips. But yeah, they agreed that they prioritize both themselves and the baby, and I mean, Simon's dead already anyway, so they don't care much about that. But they clean up the blood, the dead body and everything, and they hide the body in the cellar. Then they come up with the supposedly foolproof plan that would allow them to get away with this murder. As Eve perfectly mentions in one of the last clips, that they wanted the body to be found later. They wanted to have suspicion on them so that they could then later disprove it rather than have it linger, because they have an alibi. And this is where the brilliant thing of everything starts to come up, yeah? Which is basically their plan. So the plan was basically that they wanted the police to find out that there were twins and to figure out exactly what would happen. So everything, the story that I've basically summed up just now, they wanted the police to figure out exactly all of that as well. So basically everything that we found out from watching the clips ourselves, they wanted the police to find out as well from the interviews that they were given. So they pretty much quote-unquote played the police by having different twins attend the interview as well, because if they didn't want this to be found out, why would they attend the interviews with different twins and leave very obvious clues as well that they are different people? So yeah, so they were leaving these slight clues that we ourselves were able to find out as well just from watching the clips, that there are indeed two different people. And the moment the police found the body of Simon after a house search, Hannah disappears, leaving Eve to take the blame for it. But because Eve does not exist in the eyes of the laws, because there's no birth record of her, so basically she does not exist, they think that the police cannot arrest Eve for what she has done then. Whether it actually plays out that way is really open to interpretation, because at the very final clip she actually asks for a lawyer, which sort of indicates that they might arrest her anyway, but whether she ends up going to jail or just being set free, that you don't see that, because that's not part of the interviews. Her final sentence, however, which is, all these stories we've been telling each other are just that, stories. Now that sentence alone is just such a mind fuck depending on how you want to understand it, because some people can understand it in a way that she made everything up, everything that she was telling earlier, everything in the other interviews, everything that we've come to learn to understand, she made it up, which sort of supports the one-person theory with the mental illness, right? Even though I am more of a supporter of the two-person theory, that last sentence just leaves me confused, and I have no real idea what to make of it. Maybe she just says it to try and throw off the police again, I don't know exactly, but that is pretty much all of it. And another thing, the last thing I want to do at the end of this recap is to sort of sum up the clues and how brilliantly they played it out by planning out who attends which interview at the certain points, right? So during all of the clips you can sort of figure out which twin is attending which interview just from the minor differences. which I'm all assuming that it's all done on purpose by them. It's planned out ahead of time. Because at the beginning of every single interview, they're asked for a drink, and you can basically, from that alone, already conclude which twin attended which interview. Eve is at the very first interview of 1806. She pretends to be Hannah, and but you know that it's Eve because she drinks coffee. In the first interview, not much happens. They're just asking, because that's the brilliancy of it as well, right? They murdered Simon, but they could have just not gone to the police, but because their plan involves going to the police, because everything that was mentioned earlier, the murder and everything, happened before them going to the police. So everything, they're just playing the police pretty much at this point. So yeah, the first interview is just basically asking, the police ask stuff about Simon, stuff that they could possibly help them with their search. Hannah is at the second interview of 2507, so a week later. She's drinking tea at this point, has a bruise as well on her left cheek, and her hair is different. She has no bangs. You also see her wearing short sleeves, but it reveals no tattoo. All of that is done, that must be done deliberately, right? The third interview at 2706, so 2 days later, is with Eve. She drinks coffee again. Like at the start of every single interview, it just says, oh, what do you want to drink? Oh, I have some coffee. And the other one is tea. So that's done very deliberately, right? And she does not have a bruise. So you see no bruise on her cheek. And that is mentioned as well in the... there was the police asked her like, oh, what happened to your bruise? It's gone. They're like, oh yeah, fast metabolism, which sounds like bullshit. But yeah, that must be done because they want to have suspicion on them. That was the thing I mentioned, right? They where is it? They wanted to have the suspicion on them so they could disprove it, and the disprove is what they try to do at the end by saying, yeah, I'm not the twin, I don't exist, what you gonna do about it? That's their way of disproving it. And their way of creating the suspicion is just by having the police notice that there are two different people as well. For the fourth interview at 3006, 3 days later, is with Hannah, for the same exact reason as the second interview. Once again, drinking tea, different hair, and short sleeves without a tattoo. This is also the last interview that Hannah attends, most likely because they think they've probably at this point created enough of a suspicion for the police, and Hannah needs time as well for her to make her disappearance. Then the fifth interview comes the next day after at 107, the 1st of July, which is Eve, the same hair as every other Eve interview, and during the interview she's wearing long sleeve, but during the interview I think it's definitely done deliberately on purpose to show off her tattoo, but she spills coffee so that she has to take out her long sleeve blouse and then reveals, oh, this one has a tattoo. Trying to make it more and more obvious to the police that there are in fact two people, twins. The reveal of the tattoo is most likely also the reason for Hannah to not show up in any more of the interviews. They think that the reveal alone has created enough of a suspicion among the police, making it time for Hannah's getaway. So at this point, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and the final interview are all, they're calling her in every single day now at this point, because they're finding her to be more and more of a suspect in the case. And whenever the police actually tries to mention it, tries to ask her like, twins, and then like, what, are you fucking crazy? So even though they want the police to notice, they don't want them to figure it out immediately, or they're not just gonna say like, yeah, it's right. They're just waiting for the right time to eventually reveal everything, which is when Hannah is already basically has escaped and made is in a place where she's nowhere to be found. So where was I? The 6th interview at 2:07, 2nd of July, is Eve again. This is actually a very short interview during which the police actually ask her about possible twins. Eve gets upset and wants to leave, probably because she thinks that it might not be the right time to reveal the truth yet. Hannah could also not be entirely gone yet, so that might be a reason, like, oh shit, I do not want to get caught yet, so she just kind of makes a scene and says, get me the fuck out of here, and she eventually leaves. The 7th and final interview, so she gets called in again the day after, is obviously Eve again, in a better mood compared to the other interview, and she's actually willing to take a lie detector test and reveals everything. She says that she reveals everything about their story, everything that has that we have come to find out from all of the clips before, and she basically just tells them, and saying that she actually tells the police, like, do you want to hear the story? It's a real life fairy tale. And that is just such a, I mean, this is where, because of all of this, it really points like, yeah, it could be two people or it could be one person. Like, it's such a, I can definitely understand it from both sides. So even though I'm leaning more towards the two people theory, I can definitely understand if you think that it's one person as well, just being a criminal mastermind and being bat crap crazy at the same time. So yeah, while she reveals everything, towards the end of it, she says, can you arrest someone who doesn't exist? My sister is long gone, you can't find her, so I'm the only one here. I don't exist, you can't arrest me. So that's basically their plan coming to fruition, saying, yeah, you know everything now, but you cannot do anything about it because the person sitting across from you is one who technically does not exist in the eyes of the laws, so you should not be able to arrest it. So that's where pretty much the game ends, and everything else is still open to theory crafting, interpretation, however else you want to call it. But that's my side of how I understood things have happened, and it's absolutely blowing my mind, and it's freaking brilliant. And regardless of how you understand things yourself, I still think that at the end of it, you come out blown away and just thinking, holy freaking hell, that was amazing. And that's how I've come to think of this game as well. So yeah, that is going to be the end of this recap. Like I said earlier, I may not have summed up everything perfectly. I tried to keep the most important details in there while not being too long. So if I've forgotten some things or missed a couple of things, I'm sorry. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So feel free to tell me your version of how you perceive things yourself after playing this game, where you might feel different about certain things yourself. So yeah, feel free to share. And that is going to be the end of this game. It's going to come to a close for me because I've been pretty obsessed with this, but I have to move on, right? So thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe for more. And what's going to be coming up next, I don't know exactly. Dreamfall chapters I still have to play. I'm still playing several other games, so look out for that as well if you've enjoyed it. And yeah, that's gonna be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the future. Peace.